and maybe we'll get the other one in a minute. All right, so welcome to the Palo Alto Networks workshop at SaintCon 2015. I'm Jason Reverri, security engineer with CompuNet, and I'm joined on stage here with the rest of the CompuNet security team. You guys want to introduce yourselves? And then we have a special guest on the end. I'll let him introduce himself as well.
I'm Chris Evans, one of the other security engineers on the team. Been around with the CompuNet for a little bit over 4 years now.
Hey guys, Jeremy, CompuNet.
Jared Valentine, I'm a systems engineer with Palo Alto Networks, going on 4 years now.
I've been Jeremy for 37 years.
Oh, wow. All right, now we're high tech. All right. Yeah, here we go. All right, that's more my style. All right. Oh, and we're going to close the doors. Excellent. Thank you, sir. All right, so let's talk about what this presentation is not. This is not a sales presentation. This is not a Palo Alto, right? This is a workshop for existing Palo Alto customers. We're going to deep dive into the platform, look at some specific use cases. If you don't have a Palo at home, or where you work, or on a VM on your laptop, might be a little hard to follow along. So just not a sales pitch, not really for people that have not visited with the platform before. Yep, see ya. Anybody else? So you know, that really specific use cases to the platform. We're not going to be going into anything else that's not really in that area. So this is what the workshop is all about, right? This is 7050. One of our customers. So you're stuck with me for 2 hours. You're stuck with these characters for 2 hours. I expect that this session should be extremely interactive. I want questions, you know, use cases. I prepared some stuff, but it's not 2 hours worth of stuff. So if it falls short, it's y'all's fault, not mine. So there is a Doctor Who tie-in though. Doctor Who, who's a Whovian? Where are my peeps? All right. So Doctor Who, science fiction show, BBC, 50 plus years, right? The idea though is an alien that travels around in a mystical blue box. It's actually a spaceship, space-time ship, but the cloaking device broke on it, and now it's a blue box. So the similarities there to that and your Palo Alto, that's about the extent of the tie-in. I just really like Doctor Who, so I wanted to have it on the slides. But you know, there's several different iterations, kind of like James Bond. You know, as Doctor Who, you know, runs his course after a couple of seasons, he'll reincarnate as a different actor, and they'll bring somebody else in. And anyway, so that's across the top. And he fights bad guys, and those are the Daleks down at the bottom. So that's about the extent of it. Like I said. So why the talk, right? So you've already got the tech, hopefully. If not, you're like Danny, you left. So we're going to go through some best practices with examples. We're going to dive into the Palo Alto migration tool, version 3.1, which, again, if you don't have a copy of the VM, I've got them on USB sticks here. We can also go through some of the new features of PanOS 7. If you guys haven't had a chance to run that yet in your labs or maybe in production even. And then, of course, you know, diving into your questions, specific use cases that you want to discuss. You know, it's a really amazing opportunity to have not only the three of us here, we're all certified in the Palo Alto platform, but then also Jared as well. You know, so really, as far as I'm concerned, the brain share of Palo Alto talent within the state is up here on stage. So you guys have the platform. Let's have a discussion. Let's talk. Specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about some threat ID stuff. Again, this is the things that I've prepared. And then really, before we go into the migration tool, look at a lot of app ID and best practices around that. Quick thought on some of the recent breaches. You know, a lot of them were the old 1995 port-based firewalls. static IPS, lots of zero-day malware, and we're finding, that port-based is pretty much obsolete, especially when it comes to inspecting east-west traffic within the data center. You really have to be looking at all ports and applications specific, not just, layer 3 and layer 4.
Are you saying services don't always run on the default port?
Could you repeat that, sir?
Excuse me, are you saying services don't always run on their default ports?
I am, in fact, implying that, sir. Netcat. Netcat, port 80. No, absolutely, sir. Thank you. So, again, we're all doctors in my mind, right? Time Lords is the race that Doctor Who is. And Doctor Who's piloting the Tardis. How do you pilot your Tardis? How do you pilot your Palo Alto? So specifically around threat IDs, I want to talk about dynamic block lists. Who's using dynamic block lists today in your environment? Just a handful of you guys. Okay. So, yeah. Who's heard of them? That's a great point. The same people. Okay, great. So I'm going to show you how to set up dynamic block lists. There's a really good write-up that was on the Internet Storm Center several months ago on step-by-step how to do it. I've got it linked in the slides. But how to do it, and I'll actually show you how we're going to go through that. Again, using policies and security policies that are based around user identification, user group. This is a major functionality of the firewall that I don't see people using as often as I'd like. How many people have security policy dialed in by user? Same. 3 of the 4 guys. Oh, no, wait. Okay. No, wait. We got another one. All right. So that's good, right? I mean, that's one of the core tenets of the Palo Alto platform is being able to identify not IP addresses, but users and safely enable applications around those users. So a couple of thoughts on Wildfire. How many people have a Wildfire subscription? Great. Okay. A few more. Good. So Wildfire, as of earlier this year, they had over 23,000 Wildfire-enabled firewalls out in production, right? So if you think of each one of these as like an advanced zero-day malware analysis engine, and then you, as a Wildfire subscriber, you're kind of getting the benefits of that, right? So it's a massive malware analytics platform, arguably probably one of the largest. Yeah. It is the largest, Mr. Palo Alto. And then dynamic threat prevention signatures. The really cool thing about Wildfire that we've seen a lot of recent integration is they're pulling the analytics that they're seeing in Wildfire and they're feeding it into the other aspects of the firewall, specifically PanDB URL filtering. All right, how many people are using PanDB? Even more. So the malware category in there is actually fed partially from the threat intelligence generated in Wildfire. So Jared's nodding his head, so nothing I've said is incorrect yet. Yeah. So let's dive into dynamic block lists. Okay, gentlemen that install Palo Alto with me, how often do we install dynamic block lists on our customer sites, do you say? We try. Okay, so.
More frequently now than in the past. I said more frequently now than in the past.
All right. Cool. So the example I'm going to give you is the Internet Storm Center DShield top 20 block list, and it's a very well vetted source. There are other sources out there, but you can think of these as kind of threat intelligence feeds without context, right? So it's context based on what they're seeing, not what's being seen on your network. So it's depending on what your definition of threat intelligence is, it's a threat intelligence feed, right? So I'm going to switch over here, and I struggled to make sure that you guys could see that, but you might have some trouble in the back. But basically, this is the Internet Storm Center write-up on dynamic block lists. And who's familiar with the Internet Storm Center? SANS, right? Okay. So they've got pretty much a good step-by-step on how to go through here. And there's a person that works for Palo Alto Networks has actually gone through and set up some feeds that can easily be interpreted in the format that the Palo Alto is looking for, right? And that's this this AppSpot site here. You can see there's several different ones here. We're looking specifically at the DShield recommended block list, which always has 20 entries. It's not 20 single IP addresses, though, it's worth noting. It's generally going to be like a whole class C, each one. And we can look at it. It's just a text file, right? So it's IP ranges. But again, it could be, like a whole class C of IPs there. That's an excellent question. How often does the DShield change? I think it's hourly, if I recall correctly. That's what I set it to in people's environments, to check hourly. The Palo will pull dynamic block lists hourly. Yes, sir. Yeah, I've got a link to this at the end of the prezo, just this SANS link. And I mean, literally, it goes through what I'm going to show you guys, but basically setting up a DBL and how to set up a security policy around it, creating an outbound rule, and creating I think it even goes into an inbound rule, and then how to request a refresh of the block list from the CLI. So pretty cool stuff. So yeah, let me jump over here. Yes, yeah, I'll show you. Yeah, the block list does in fact exist in the policy. Yep. Yeah, just wait and see, Kyle.
The short answer is you reference it just like an address object.
Yep. We'll set it up as an object. So yeah, I'm sorry. I should have done that. I apologize. The question was, is the dynamic block list referenced like an address object? And yes, it is. Sorry. So we go in, log into the Palo Alto. This is a Palo Alto running on Palo Alto's network. It's like a demo cloud. So there are other folks in here, but I'm able to go ahead and I'm not able to commit anything, but I'm able to make some changes. I have commitment issues on this firewall, so. All right, so we go, and by the way, this is running PanOS 7. If anyone hasn't had a chance to look at it, we'll, like I said, dive into it a little bit later. But we have dynamic block lists, and we see somebody's already set one up, but we're going to add a new one. And we'll call this DShield. Can't really see that, so. And I just copied the text file URL here as a reference. And notice this can be HTTP, HTTPS. Doesn't care. And we test the source. And yep, okay. An access error occurred. Maybe because I don't have commit on that. Oh yeah, that's a good point. No DNS. Yeah, it's a demo. So you know what? I have a backup plan. Aha. Because demos always go smoothly. And side note, sorry. Who's familiar with Panachrome? Okay. So Panachrome is a not officially supported plugin for Chrome that in 7.0 isn't quite as interesting, but in earlier revs of the code, it can be kind of fun to look at, and I'll look at that. Show you guys that in a minute. Yep. I get disconnected to VPN. Oh no, I got disconnected from the lab. That's what's going on. There we go. Now, the main caveat I'd have to say for the lab environment is it's kind of like a semi-prod environment that we have in our office. And I've already set up the DBLs on there, so it's not going to be quite as exciting. But I'll set them up locally, and you guys can see how they work. So. All right, so we go to objects. Dynamic block lists. So look, we've got all the dynamic block lists in here that the person at Palo Alto was nice enough to set up for us. So, but let's go ahead and add the DShield top 20.
Interesting side note on this too.
Yeah.
So just as a side note on here, even if you define dynamic block lists, they're not actually downloaded and used by the firewall until they're tied into a policy. So it won't bother looking for what those objects are until they're actually in use.
Excellent point, sir. Excellent point. All right, so we'll test that. And look, hey, the URL is accessible. All right. So we've got the block list there. And now we have to reference it in the security policy. And how are you guys able to see what I'm doing? Okay. I guess yeah, move closer maybe. There's lots of room up front. Yeah. I've already increased the magnification on the screen to what I'm comfortable with. I don't want to increase it anymore. I can, but I don't know that I want to. So one quick win, right, is to enable the block list from the outside, right? So we've got outside the network or the untrust zone or the internet or whatever it's called in your environment, untrusted L3, another common zone name. Destination, for inbound, I actually kind of like to say any on this one. And you know, because we don't want to talk into the DMZ, and we don't really want to have to set up another security policy for that, and we don't want to talk into the inside, don't want to set up another security policy for that. So, you know, any destination, any app, any port, and we're gonna, well, okay, so good interesting segue there. With PanOS 7, we have multiple drop options, right? Or multiple actions when we have a security policy match. So in the past, we had allow and deny. Now we can do allow, deny, drop, reset, reset both client server, etc. Yes, sir. Okay, so what is the difference between drop and deny? Mr. Palo Alto, I'm going to throw this one to you.
That's a good question. I'd actually have to go look that up. Okay. I think deny is more of a historical carryover from the previous versions. So because you only had allow or deny previously. And so if you use deny, my assumption would be that really just means drop. But you have the additional methods of dropping the traffic going forward. And the other thing I would say as well is I think dynamic block list is a little bit of a misnomer, not for you, but you know, for the guys that coded the web front end. It's really dynamic object, right? You're just creating a firewall object, and we're going to reference that object in the security policy, what Jason's just done. So yeah, I almost call it more of a dynamic object, but it's listed under the block list because you are downloading a big list of IP addresses.
I think one of the two.
Right. Right.
So silent discard versus non-silent discard is what you're saying.
Different than reset.
So you're saying silent discard versus non-silent discard and whether we send the ICMP error message. Yeah, makes sense. Thanks for the clarification.
Excellent. Great feedback. So just to clarify, I forgot to repeat the question. I apologize. What's the difference between drop and deny? So, yeah.
So the other issue here is if we're talking about a IDS or IPS action versus a firewall action, right? So a straight deny in a firewall is not going to send a response, where what we were speaking of is an IPS action where we're actually inserting a reset in the TCP session, and it's going to be protocol specific. Either way, session's not happening.
Excellent. And I fouled up and forgot to reference the source object. Yeah. So I wasn't going to commit it, but yeah. But yeah, so you come in here and so source address, we want to say dshield. Where's the other one? Oh, thank you. Yeah. So I can't really see that there, so appreciate that. Yeah, the dehealed top 10 or top 20. So now, we read the security policy, we give it a name, right? And we say source outside from any of the addresses in this dynamic object or dynamic block list. And then destination any application, any port, and we're going to go ahead and get rid of it. Yep, and we can flag it ICMP unreachable. We can also, interestingly, do log forwarding to anywhere. But the nice thing is if you were to reverse this and say from the inside going to anybody on the drop list, right? That kind of becomes an interesting use case, right? Because now we're saying, let's say inside, and the destination. Sorry. Any of my inside addresses, and the destination is the outside. Dehealed, right? So that becomes a very interesting policy, right? Because now you're looking for indicators of a compromise, right? Or somebody command and control traffic, things like that, depending on what the bad guys are that are on this list. So maybe your action isn't just going to be, don't worry about it, just log it, or syslog it, but maybe you want to send an email alert, right? And so that you can start to do incident response on anybody who's matching this policy. So a couple other interesting use cases that I've run into in the field, talking with customers, specifically in one environment, the security group got really excited by this because to update that dynamic block list, right, does not require a commit to the firewall. So start to think about that. It's like they had their own security operations center that they maintained separate of the network operations group, right? And any change control done to the firewall was done through the network operations group. But they had a lot of security intelligence developed within their SOC, and they wanted to be able to dynamically block specifically egress traffic. So traffic that was generated inside their network that they wanted to say, no, you've been compromised, we want to put you in timeout. And so they were really excited about this functionality because they could essentially update a text file on a web server that they owned and dynamically block that content, right, or that traffic. So pretty neat use case. Any other neat use? Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah. So the question is there a way to give feedback to the user that, hey, you've been blocked by the firewall, call, the help desk or whatever. So I would say maybe your best option, no, I guess really application-based block. I was going to say maybe, yeah.
So how can you tell the user that they're being blocked? I guess that's really going to be application specific. It's a little difficult to do that in non-interactive, type applications, where it's a web browser, if they're going to Facebook, if they're going to a malware domain or, an adult domain or whatever, the block lists are there to be able to communicate that to you. But, for a lot of other applications, it's pretty difficult to do that, communicate that to the actual end user themselves. Block list. You could potentially do something like that if you wanted to hijack the captive portal functionality and potentially misuse that that as a way to communicate. And then just to go back a little bit, the deny drop question. So actually,
What's that question?
Deny drop or yeah. So I did a little more digging. So deny actually takes an application specific action. So depending on the app ID that was in use, some of them are silent dropped, some of them were actually issued a reset. And like for web browser session or something, you don't want the user to sit there and wait and wait and wait and wait. You just let them know, hey, it's your reset and your connection's been severed. And so so before 7.0, Palo Alto Networks got to choose what the deny action was, and it was variable depending on the application. Now with the new 7.0 options, if you want to hit that drop-down box again, Jason, now the new options are deny will continue to allow us to select the appropriate deny option, but if you wanted to override that with being silent or only resetting one side of the connection, we give you those choices now.
The other way I see for that functionality to work, but it would depend on future functionality in the firewalls, is tied into a URL filtering policy. If the URL filtering policy could refer to those dynamic block lists, you could get that behavior that you were looking for on there too.
So the question is, what's our recommendation on the action? I'd say it's policy and application specific. For me personally, anybody want to embellish on that? Yep, no? Okay, so it depends.
I'll take the deny.
Yeah, the deny, yeah. The deny, I mean, with the deny, you're going to get more of a reset, probably, especially with an egress type scenario where you've got users maybe egressing to the internet, you want it to reset quicker. So a deny or a reset client might be a good choice there.
I think the other ones are. I really think the new options there are if you want to override what the existing behavior is today. If you see something, you say, I don't like that type of behavior, I'd like to override that. Now you have some additional choices where you didn't before. So I think put it this way, existing policies from 6.0 moving into 7.0, it stays as deny, and we retain the existing behavior, and it isn't until you go in and actually change it to be something else. But generally speaking, you'd probably do that when you have a good reason to. There's something specific you're looking to accomplish by changing it.
Cool. Really appreciate the interactive nature of the workshop so far. So keep the questions coming. This is great. So any questions about dynamic block lists? Really powerful tool. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Right. So the question is blocking Tor endpoints? Is that basically somewhere? So okay. So blocking ingress traffic from Tor endpoints. So yeah. I mean, essentially, you do need to generate that into a text file to use it as a dynamic block list. Nice thing is, this guy's already done it, or at least some of it. Right. You've got an emerging Tor list here. Oh, well, yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
I was just saying, but your use case is you want a specific URL that's geared towards your network there and getting the results on that. And the short of it is there's a specific format that we're expecting the addresses to be in. And in a lot of cases, the URL feeds you have are not in that exact same format. So if that's the case, you probably will have to do some degree of formatting, whether you have something that can programmatically check that site and create something as a web server within your site that could then be probed, or you have a different way that can create it there. If the data needs to be massaged a bit first there, then it may require some input there rather than going directly to the end site because it does expect it in a specific format.
Yeah, so my mileage has varied a little bit with some of the other lists on here. I'm not as familiar with emergingthreats.net. Anybody familiar with them? Anybody want to vouch for them? Danny? I thought you left. You just moved. Okay. They're awesome. Okay, so an awesome Tor exit node feed. from emerging threats. So vouched for personally by Metacortex. So, but this guy's already gone through and pre-formatted it in a way that Palo Alto wants to see, right? There's your text file. So yeah, in the past you would have had to have somehow generated that and formatted it into a text file with an external system. Go ahead, sir. Gotcha. Yeah, so essentially the same file, just not with the text extension. So yeah, so yes, sir. That's an excellent point. So, and I wanted to bring that up, so thank you, Kyle. The question is it beneficial to reference the dynamic block lists and multiple block lists in a single security policy or in separate security policies? It depends on the use case, right? So do you really care if people are bouncing around outside the firewall? Not so much, right? I mean, there's people out there all the time bouncing around. I mean, HD's scanning the internet every 3 minutes or something now. So I mean, you're going to see a lot of traffic. But what's interesting is if you separate it out by a separate policy, I'd say from an alerting standpoint is where that gets really interesting, right? So you want to set up a separate security policy with a different log forwarding profile that maybe sends an email alert. So you want to know when somebody's trying to use Tor to access a web server, right? You might reference this dynamic block list in that security policy and then maybe send an alert or something like that, right? So I'd say it's on a different functionality standpoint on how you'd want to break it out. Yes.
And to add to that, I would say the reporting, you kind of already went there alerting, but the reporting visibility, if one of your customers calls you and says, hey, how come I can't hit your website? And you go look in your security log and you see, yep, I blocked it from my list of 30 block lists, and you're in there somewhere. Trying to fix that problem might be difficult versus, oh, I see that you're coming from a Tor exit node because you hit the block the Tor node rules versus the D-shield rules versus the other one. So being able to break that out might give you a little more context if you're doing some troubleshooting. But if, like Jason said, if you don't care, we'll throw them all into one big list and block it and don't log it, and you're just, it's being blocked and go from there. So you get a little more context with that.
Yep, absolutely. Easier to troubleshoot, more granularity, and I mean, unless you're really taxing the firewall, adding another security policy in there probably isn't really going to make that big of a difference. And plus being able to do the drop down and look at the log hits really easy on that policy, right? Yeah, so the security policies, to reiterate, should be at the top of your match list. So you look at, like, in our lab environment, I'm pushing those down from Panorama as a shared policy above all of the local firewall policies. Yep, absolutely. Pre-rule. So if we did geolocation, they would put right into that. Because you care more about blocking the guys in the country you don't care about, and then they can get the other gigantic. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're doing geo IP blocking, maybe that's the top policy in your shared policy list across all your firewalls, pushed down from Panorama, and then your DBLs right below that. That's an excellent point. Yeah. Everybody know what Panorama is, right? Just want to add context. Okay. Yes. No. Maybe you're falling asleep. Okay. So that's kind of dynamic block lists in a nutshell. So, all right. There it is. Yes, sir. Yeah. So who makes the lists? Excellent point. Yep. They're all different, right? They're all, Spamhaus, OpenBL, the emerging threats, D-Shield. These are all just like publicly accessible dynamic lists that are always being updated based on their threat intelligence that they're generating on whatever platform it is. So and again, you know, my mileage has varied a little bit with them. I will tell you, DShield is pretty strong, and it's pretty well accepted across. I'll vouch for them, especially on an ingress block. I can tell you guys a funny story. One of the first times I did this, I was in an environment, a large educational institution, and I was going back to do some IPS tuning, and I threw the DShield block list in there and committed. It's supposed to be, you know, a non-disruptive change, you know, block the bad guys, right? And all of a sudden, I was just getting thousands of hits. And I started sweating a little. I'm like, oh boy, I did my security policy wrong, right? So I'm like, is everything okay? And they're like, yeah, you know, everything looks great on the network, no problems. I'm like, all right, well, I'm looking at and just tons of hits. They're actively being attacked by somebody on the DShield block list. And it was just like, you know, again, just this huge win right at that moment, because it was, they're actively seeing the traffic there, and we're just sort of blocking it immediately. So. But yeah, for my first thing was, you know, I doubt myself, right? I'm like, oh, I messed up the policy. I'm blocking everything. I did an any somewhere, you know. But no, just, they were just getting attacked. So kind of funny. All right, so dynamic block lists. So now we're going to dig into best practices with app ID policies. Is everybody finding this beneficial? I mean, this is good dialogue back and forth. Maybe some things you can take away. So was that a thumbs up or is that a question? Oh, a thumbs up. All right, thanks. So some best practices with app ID, right? Group your policies based around application, right? The application you're delivering. And especially with 7.0, use tags, right? They came out with tags with 6, but with 7, you've got like a tag browser now, where it's a lot easier to filter down by tags. This is a great function within the firewall that'll allow you to use. So be using the tags, color code the tags, because then it makes it real easy to see, you know, outside red, inside green, you know, those kinds of things. The bad guys are always red. Excellent point. Mr. Turbo Speed. And when you're going in and the last one there, allowing personal apps, we've kind of had discussions around this, and one thing I'd add for context there is allow personal apps with URL filtering best practices. So URL filtering, blocking malware category, blocking dynamic DNS category, blocking phishing, unknown categories, things like that, right? Oh yeah, proxy avoidance and anonymization. Yes, thank you. So all categories that you'd probably want to block on that policy. So I'll show you guys some examples of what this would look like. But any questions around that? Anybody doing this today that is willing to raise their hand? They're like, yes, that's me. Yes, you sir. Every time. So yeah. So Jared's been there. I blame Jared. I always blame Jared. So that's a good rule. All right. So again, I'm back in the demo box here. We're going to look at the security policies. I'm having trouble seeing that. So, yeah.
So, a couple real quick notes about tags before we get too far off topic on those. One is that tags are extremely useful just because you can add multiple different types of tags to rules. So, some use cases that I've seen people use them for are if you want to tag who added a particular rule, if you're in a large organization there and you're not using the auditing of who's logged in to see who added what rules or edit them, so that you can contact them if there's a question or a rule needs to be removed. It's a useful use case on that. Tagging any new or temporary rules is a good way to put it in place on there. And it's just handy that you can use multiple tags per rule.
And you can see how nicely they've tagged all the security policies here for us. It looks great. So the first thing on the slide was creating groups, tagging them. We see groups of IT applications here. Safely enabling internet-hosted enterprise apps. Really having trouble seeing that, sorry. So this would be an example of that, right? Where you've specifically said these destinations these applications, very specific, and on any port in this case. Another one is IT-sanctioned SaaS applications. So this is what a security policy would look like for that. Any source to any destination, if it's this very, very strict rule or strict object of applications. One thing to note here too, known user. So a known corporate user, that we know who it is. So we've got the list of IT sanctioned apps here. Again, box.net, the usual suspects, GoToMeeting, that kind of thing. Notice WebEx is intentionally not on that list. Just wait till the next session for that. I'm sure it will be all over the place. Then some like general business applications for the infrastructure, right? Again, we're referencing application filters here instead of actual, full static lists. Everybody know the difference between an application filter and an application group? I should cover it. Yes, excellent point, sir. An application group is a static group of applications that you've defined on the firewall, and it won't change unless you change it, right? So a filter is a little better though, different, in that you can specify criteria to match. So you can say, my favorite's like high-risk applications, like applications that Palo Alto has given a risk factor of 5. Well, those are the risky apps, right? Oh yeah. Let me give you an example. So these are the different filter criteria that you can do. So you can do, browser-based, peer-to-peer, peer-to-peer and risky, right? And it dynamically changes the list for you. What's really cool about this is as content updates come down to the firewall minimum once a week, this can change. That's great because you don't have to go in and maintain that list, right? It's maintained for you. Word of caution though, it can change. So that critical application now all of a sudden is deemed peer-to-peer risky 5. Well, now it's going to be on the peer-to-peer risky 5 app list or app filter, excuse me. So what can we do about that? 7.0, yes. In 7.0, you can actually tell it to dynamically update your content, but not apply the new application signatures. Thank you. Until you approve them. So it's a manual process of going in and approving those changes after you've vetted them. So just kind of a stopgap option if you're in a change-sensitive environment where that might impact, right? And you're using application filters heavily. All right, any questions around that? So let's look at enabling personal apps. So allowed domain groups to use personal apps. Here we've got source users that are authenticated specific domain users that are allowed to send email via SMTP, right? So that actually kind of leads me into the next one, the next example I wanted to show you guys. If I can find my mouse, there we go. So let's talk about enabling, the specific use case I want to show is enabling DNS from your data center. So what's kind of considered best practice is in an enterprise, you want to have all your users leveraging your internal DNS so that they're not hitting the internet for those DNS queries, and you can kind of control around that, right? So you only want the corporate DNS servers being used. So you want to have a policy in there that says, okay, I'm going to allow the corporate DNS servers to go out to these authorized forwarders, right, via DNS, the application DNS. And then you kind of create a security policy underneath that that maybe will alert on people doing DNS just straight to the internet, just to Google DNS or whatever, right? And of course, this wouldn't necessarily apply to, say, a guest network. So this is specific to your owned endpoints, right? Your own users. And then the goal is to set that other application policy to block. And maybe I put 30 days on there, right? Whatever your environment is appropriate for your environment. But basically, you want to control where they're getting their name servers. And the reason for this is that we know that the bad guys are compromising endpoints. They're changing DNS to circumvent name resolution so that they can harvest credentials or whatever it is they're doing, right? Does that make sense to everybody? And the nice thing about this is it easily applies to, say, other applications like SMTP, right? SMTP from your mail server, that's good, right? SMTP from an end user, not necessarily good. So do you guys want to see an example of what that looks like, or is that good? DNS. Sure. All right. So we got our DNS servers here. DNS 1 is 10.151. DNS 2, 10.161. And we've also got them in a separate network zone called DNS DMZ. And you give it a name. And we're going to say, well, we know they're in the DNS DMZ. And we know we only want DNS 1 and DNS 2 to match this policy. And the destination is, I keep doing that. Why am I doing that? L3 untrust. We're only going to let it out to, let's see if it's in there. Oh. Because Google DNS is our trusted forwarder. All right. And the application is going to be DNS. And we're going to leave it at application default, which if nobody's on PanOS 6 or higher, that's kind of the new standard instead of any, which is nice. We're going to allow the traffic, but we're going to go ahead and do the deeper packet inspection. That's best practice. So that's what the policy would look like, allowing the servers. Then we'd create a security policy underneath it that would say, from the trust zone from any source, and the destination's outside any server, and the application DNS. Right now, if our security policy is just allowing people to egress, we're just basically setting up a security policy that's going to identify the traffic, and then quickly, when appropriate for your environment, we can set that to a deny, right? And then effectively block that traffic, and then maybe alert on that too. See who's trying to reach out to potentially rogue DNS servers, right? Or just DNS servers we don't want them using. Any questions? And again, could be SMTP, right? We're an application layer firewall here, so we should be controlling the applications appropriately, not just blocking ports. So, all right. So after that, we look at data center applications and how to create security policy around data center applications. This is Active Directory, LDAP, email, admin apps are RDP, SSH, and then really, and I kind of dove into it a little bit earlier, so I'm not going to stick with it too much, but blocking the bad stuff, right? And that's really where those application filters kind of come in. I like the risky apps application filter. We can also block, file sharing applications, and then of course the DNS and the SMTP to public that I was just talking about. So, and that looks like this. So we go down, this is top down, first match out the firewall, right? So further down, we've got tags for risky apps, right? So we've got risky file blocking, right? source, any zone from these groups, destination anywhere, that's a general web browsing or SSL, and it's to these categories, right? It's kind of interesting, huh? These are kind of the bad, potentially bad things, right? So we're looking for ways to block the bad guys from getting the traffic out of the network, right? So a lot of times they're using dynamic DNS domains, or if our URL filter wasn't able to resolve them, or it's an unknown or questionable, that kind of thing. Yep. I've been talking.
No, go back to that policy for a second. This is an interesting policy. Go to the URL categories. So when you create security policy, you have to match all those tabs to get the action, right? You have to match the source, match the destination. And so what we're saying is we're matching applications, and normally when you do a URL filter, you're just going to do a match web browsing, and then you're going to have a permit statement, and you put it through a URL filter, block these categories, permit these other categories. What's interesting though is what would happen if you wanted to still allow people to surf to those categories, but you did not want them to be able to download files just from those categories. You still want them to be able to download files, but maybe not from those specific categories. And so this is a very specific use case on why would you ever put a URL category as part of your match criteria as opposed to an action within a URL filter object. And so here, what you'll see is, yeah, if you're going to go to these URL categories, we go to the action, you'll see that actions actually allow, but then the file blocking, that object is probably pretty strict in that it doesn't let you download executables or PDFs or any kind of Java, Flash, Office documents, anything like that, because you don't need to download those types of files from those particular categories. So instead of just putting in a big old general, hey, sorry, you can't download an executable file, you're being a little more surgical about it. You're saying, I'll still let you visit those URLs, but I'm going to be very restrictive about what content you can retrieve from those URLs. Very different from just hey, I just want to block it and be done with it. So this is allowing, this is preventing too many blocked web pages from coming up, but you're really taking a little more control over the content, and it's an interesting use case. Almost no one ever uses that URL category as part of the match criteria, but that's a really good use case. So that one's a little bit of a curveball, but an interesting use of policy.
Yeah, and I'll show you the threat object here, the security object for that file block. So files to block, we've got batch files and packed executable torrent files, encrypted RARs, encrypted zips, all those sorts of things. So excellent point. So you can go to those sites, you just can't transfer those file types from those sites. It's a very, very interesting use case, and very powerful though if you think about it. All right, we talked about blocking DNS and SMTP, but I can show you again what that kind of taking out the trash policies look like here. So watching public DNS and SMTP, again, application DNS, SMTP, just keeping an eye on that, right? All right. Any questions around that? All right, so then the last kind of area that we go into with identifying from security policy, we look at, so App ID best practices, right? We look at weeding out the unknowns and dealing with unknown applications. So what's kind of considered best policy is to get rid of all the unknowns that are knowns, right? So it kind of doesn't make sense, I guess, but you know, this is an application, maybe it's an internally developed application, or, you know, something like that, maybe more of an edge case. You can create a custom application so that it's no longer identified as unknown TCP or unknown UDP, right? This is something that you want to identify, set security policy around, and then go back in so that you can weed out, and that when something actually does show up as unknown TCP or unknown UDP, you know that maybe you need to do investigation on that or incident response on any matches to that. So, yeah, and I guess I'd say that custom app IDs where possible, and app overrides kind of as a last resort if there no other options exist, right? We'll look at what that looks like here. Oh, you know, I skipped over blocking the bad apps. We should maybe look at that. So we're saying, you know, like blocking Tor, blocking BitTorrent, things like that. I mean, that's, hopefully you guys are seeing that kind of policy on the firewall. You're implementing that, so. I'm still in the risky apps. Unexpected traffic, here we go. So this is, you know, should be examined, you know, and the policy adjusted by an explicit rule, right? So basically we want to weed out with a security policy above the security policy so that we don't get matches to this. And if there is an unexpected traffic, it matches this, again, we can do our incident response or investigation on that. And that would look like just a standard policy, right? But if something matches that and it's an unknown, well, okay, we know that some strange stuff going on here. You guys want to add anything to that? No?
Yeah, it's unexpected traffic because it did match any of your other policies, and so anything that hits that, now you're going to go back and say, okay, do I create a rule that explicitly permits this, or do I create a rule that explicitly blocks this? You know, you're gonna take those matches and push them up the stack, you know, up higher in your security policy. So yeah, it's kind of a catch-all with ultimately the idea being getting to that deny all, but before then, that's what things are going to hit until you move them up.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Okie dokie. All right, so now we're going to talk about the migration tool. So how many of you, and you know, we're an hour in, all right, we got an hour left. You guys have been great about interactive, you know, asking questions, appreciate that very much. But I'm going to show you how to use the migration tool. So in the past, the firewall migration tool was from other firewall platforms to a Palo Alto platform. And was available only to people like us up on stage. With 3.0, they released it to all customers. And it's part of the torrent downloads, you can get it here. Runs on hypervisor like you know, VMware, or it'll even run on ESXi. And just to reiterate, did everybody get a copy?
Anybody need a copy of the migration tool?
If not, it's available on the torrents, or you can grab one here.
It's also available on the Palo Alto site.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can download it directly from Palo Alto if you don't trust me, which I wouldn't trust me. So the current version is 3.16, and they basically took it all back and completely rewrote the tool. One key thing to note is it's community supported only. If you call Palo Alto Tech and say, yeah, I'm using migration tool, they'll be like, sorry. You know, you call us, we might help you, right? So it was released in, I think it was April or May of this year. And one of the key things is not only can you go from other firewall platforms within this tool, but you can migrate within the Palo Alto platform, right? How many of you are still using just straight layer 4 port block policies, security policies, right? Not actually using app. Or maybe you're moving towards app, but it's a slower process, right? Once you're already on the Palo Alto platform, what this migration tool will help you do is go through the process of identifying traffic that's matching your port block policy and creating application layer policy around that. So in the past, before this tool, it was kind of a manual process. You'd clone a policy, call it, policy-app, right? And then you'd watch it for a while, and you know that you're trying to enable DNS, for instance, right? So you'd create an application policy above your port block or port policy that says application DNS and port application default, and then your existing port policy is underneath that. That's just service port 53, right? UDP 53. And then you watch that policy for a while, and you identify the applications that are actually hitting that until you've eliminated them, and then you disable the policy and delete it. So what the migration tool does is it automates this process, and it automates the waiting time, right? It'll actually go back in the logs and digest your logs on your firewall via the API and tell you which applications match that security policy, which is really cool because we like to be able to move ahead and move quickly, right? So pretty neat. I think that's everything on that. So when you boot up the VM on your hypervisor of choice, again, it will if you want it in a shared environment, it will run on like ESX, ESXi, but you'll get the IP address that it's assigned, and the default creds, admin, Palo Alto.
That's one quirk that I've kind of noticed about the migration tool, and something that they might fix in a future version, but it seems to be dependent upon DHCP, and I haven't found a decent way to static IP it so far in terms of setting environments there. So it works really well if you want to put it on Fusion or run it on your local laptop there, and it's very light resources there. If you're putting it in a permanent setting there where you're running it on an ESX host, you may need to put it in a VLAN where it can grab a DHCP address there. I've had to kind of wrestle with it before in the past where it's been on a static IP only VLAN.
I've had mixed results with that. I've actually been able to get a static IP on it, but it was in 3.1, a more recent revision than just straight 3. So yeah, appreciate that. All right, so I'm gonna fire up Fusion here. So I've already done the heavy lifting of extracting the tar file and moving it into my VMware folder, and I'm just gonna go ahead and start up the migration tool I'm running Fusion here, but it's worth noting it's built on CentOS. But you can actually get into the terminal. You can SSH to it. There's a limited subset of commands, like shutdown, IF, config, stuff like that. And it's the creds are the same, admin, Palo Alto. So I guess one caution I'd say is if you are going to leave this up, obviously you want to change the default creds. And I'll show you where to do that, but it doesn't. The migration tool doesn't have a tie-in to like LDAP or AD or Radius or anything like that for auth. So I see here my IP address, 172.16.3.138. And normally you get a EULA that you have to agree to. I've already agreed to it, so but it's just a big shiny button you press. So admin, Palo Alto. Press through it without reading the EULA. I would never suggest such a thing, sir. That is just bad practice. How dare you even imply that I would say such a thing? So, I mean, this is kind of the general system dashboard, if you will. And again, default creds, probably one of the first things you want to change, unless you're just running it on demand on a local hypervisor. And you can add or go in and change creds here. You can even add a neat little icon if you want. So one thing to note, as you work on projects within the migration tool, they are user specific. So if you have multiple users that are working on a migration, maybe you want to share the creds? I don't know. So you can also set the time zone, and you can run cron jobs from this. So you can have it periodically go out and evaluate security policy for application matching. So some kind of neat stuff. One of the first things you're probably going to want to do is update. So you see I've got version 3.16 here. But if you go through to updates, it tells you, yes, I can see conversion updates.paloaltonetworks.com. There's the big shiny update button here. So the version that's on the sticks and the version that went out on the torrent is version 3.1. So you probably want to update immediately when you run the tool. After you run update, it'll usually kick you back out. You have to agree to the EULA again and sign back in, unless that's a new function on the. I'm pretty sure it'll still do that. So for an existing Palo Alto firewall, we're going to want to pull the information via the API. So we want to be able to communicate with the management interface of our Palo Alto. I'm going to go ahead and set that up. See the big add device here. Is there anything else I want to talk about first? Nope, that's good. So the management interface by default, runs HTTPS port 443. That's where it responds to the API calls as well. And we'll specify a model. We've got a 3K in our lab that we're using today. But maybe you've got a 7K, right? So you're going to go and say 7K. You never know. Super secret password. I may have gotten, nope, okay. Just taking its time. So now we see we've got our lab firewall connected via the API. And we can investigate it a little bit if we want to. We see our API key here. Good stuff. Now we want to create a project for our migration. So we'll add a project. We'll call this SaintCon 2015. And we're going to specify our source as the firewall that we just added. And then we're going to initialize the database. This is just basically going to build the framework that we're going to import the policy into. Hey, look at that. So across the top here, you have different tabs that kind of guide you through the process. And it's worth noting that when you mouse over them, you get kind of a description here. So I don't know if everyone can see that, but just trust me. It says manage policies, manage objects. When you're coming from a different platform, especially, anyway, what we tend to do a lot, this is really helpful to import policies and objects, things like that, because it makes it so that you're not starting from ground zero. And it doesn't pull everything over, but it pulls a lot over. So, but again, this workshop's geared specifically for people that already have Palo Alto. So we're moving into the application adoption phase, right? We're looking at a policy set that's port-based only, and we want to app ID enable it because of all the other things we discussed in the last hour. So we start off on this first tab, and the platform that we're moving around in, or moving from to, is Palo Alto. We see we have our device list here. And so any connected devices via the API will be listed here. You can also export the XML config of the Palo Alto and import it directly in here. That's good, right? It's not bad, especially if you're maybe setting up a second firewall. or you want to adjust it offline without making direct calls via the API for whatever reason.
Another use case for that would be if you have Panorama, and if you're so another use case for that would be if you have Panorama, and if you're pulling the logs from Panorama, but you're altering the config on the firewall, that may be a use case where you want to do the static configs there from a different device than you're pulling the actual logs from there.
Good point. So before I go into this a little bit more, just thought of something. If you're in an environment where there are multiple people working on the firewall at the same time, while you're in the migration tool, don't make changes to the firewall. I've been in environments before where we're working within the migration tool and someone's in the web interface and they've changed it. Well, it changes the XML on the back end. Well, we've pulled the XML via the API into the tool. Now there's modifications. When the two come together and you do a diff on the config, it's a nightmare. It's a mess. It's like, everything's out of place, right? So then you end up having to start over. So basically, a lockout on firewall changes while you're making these changes is best practice. Oh yeah, you can do an admin lock on it too. Absolutely, through the web interface. So great point. All right, so since we're digging specifically into this firewall, I'm going to go ahead and double click on it there under our device list. And it immediately pulls us into the security policy set. So it pulled this down directly via the API. And we can see that we've got a bunch of different policies here. Not a lot, again, it's a lab environment. But here's a good example, right? So we've got a security policy here that's allowing port 80, port 443, and 8443, right? And but we don't really know what applications those are. We want to move again to a safely enabled application set. So what we're going to do is clone that policy. Those are down here at the bottom. And we want to copy it below. Oh, I got to select a vsys first. So it kind of guides you through it, even if you... I've done this a bunch and I still forget some things. So now we have a clone of the policy right below the existing policy. And pretty straightforward there. This, is it 16? Yeah, 16 will technically never get hit because of 6, right? So now we want to change 6 by dynamically looking at the log data on the firewall. So we're gonna tell the migration tool to reach out via the API, digest the logs that were matches to this policy, and tell us the applications that were a match. So we right-click and go to App ID Adoption and retrieve apps. And you have the option to retrieve apps for all the rules. On a larger firewall policy set, that might be interesting. On our example, we're just going to say the selected. Oh, yeah. Oh, yep. Thank you, Chris. Yes, I forgot the connector, which is here. So the other thing you have to do is tell it a time frame for the logs, and that's where the connector comes in. So got ahead of myself. Apologize for that. So you can give it a name. Last 30 days. And this also would be maybe where you want to pull logs, maybe from Panorama or another source. You could do that. In our example, we're just going to do it from the local firewall. You have to specify a vsys, and then you give a period of time. Obviously custom down at the bottom, but these are kind of the preset ones. And we want to say the last 30 days here. So now we jump back over to the security policy where we were working earlier. It's the nice brick-looking icon at the top there. And now we do App ID Adoption from selected. And it reaches out, and no matches in the last... Oh, yes. Thank you, Jared. Yeah, well... All right, we'll give it a, yeah, it's the demo gods there. I didn't do a blood sacrifice earlier, so give it a second. Maybe I got logged out.
So while we're waiting on that.
Yep.
So while we're waiting on that, let me talk about a few other useful functions for this tool. So the app integration there is extremely handy, and this is very, very tedious to do by hand. I know firsthand, where you just filter down and you're looking for applications. So this part's fantastic. But some other things you can do is use it to merge other rules there, or you can use this to, if you have an existing firewall rule set and you're implementing Panorama, you can use it to modify your rules from being a firewall rule set to a pre or post rule set that's suitable for importation into Panorama.
All right, I'm not sure why that didn't work. Let's just see here. Try again. No.
It may not have been firmly selected there.
Yeah. Yeah, but once it comes back with no matches, I mean, it's. I know we have traffic on the firewall. Okay, yeah, we could do that. This should be a nice, robust list. Well, let me try something here. All right, looks a little different. Yeah, that one's going to be a long one for 30 days. Not the example I wanted, but so what I did there is this shiny red button at the top exits out of the project. So I exited out of the project and I re-entered it. You know, again, free tool, mileage may vary, but good option. Yes, sir. Analyze for shadow rules. Could you use it for that? I don't think so. No, I mean, so with PanOS 7, there's a validate option. As instead of committing changes to the firewall, you can validate. There we go. A validate will actually check through the full policy set and it will report back on shadow rules for you. So that would probably be where I'd start on those. All right. I'm going to drop back to the example that we had here. But you can see that it filled in the applications there. Kind of interesting. Oh, did I do user ID? I can't really see it. I'm half blind, apparently. Okay, so no matches on that policy. Let's try this one. Or we can look at this. So you click on, not that. You can see here a list of all the applications over the course of that 30 days. So some interesting stuff here. And if you wanted to remove selected applications, you can go through and select applications and remove them. You can also dynamically, kind of as you check boxes here, you can create a new security policy around those if you wanted to. Another option instead of doing the clone, or if you wanted to create just specific ones. So. Let's see. Maybe this is the one that I meant to do. Can't really see it. And I've lost my toolbar. Yeah, look at that. Have you? Okay. Yay! Thank you, Chris. All right. So now, let's try this other one. So again, clone the policy, right click, app ID adoption, retrieve apps. No matches. Yep. All right. Well,
You want to look right in the firewall itself and see if you see any traffic inbound from the outside and which wall it's hitting, so you know which ones we.
yeah, I thought I did that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so. All right. So we've got the outbound rule, and we've got the clone of it below it. Those are all the applications again that match that policy. Not the policy that I wanted in the demo because it's a massive amount of applications, but still an okay use case. So the next step is you go through the list. You look at the applications that you want to safely enable. So say most of these applications are in no way what we wanted on there, right? So we're going to say, yeah, get rid of all those. Maybe. It may not let me do that right. It's a big set, so. My poor local VM is struggling here. I did pick 30 days, yes, so I'm my own worst enemy here, for sure. I should have done 1 hour, right? Yeah, the policy that I had tested with earlier, had a nice, web browsing, SSL, yay, in the last 30 days. There it goes, okay. We're going to change this from the last 30 days to the last 1 day. Let's do that. Okay. No, it's not cooperating. I was working on it yesterday. I'm sure there's log data in there from the last day. Let's do the last 7 days. Oh, that's in there too. Sorry, buddy. All right. Well, looks like the demo gods are not going to cooperate with me today. Sorry. But once you've created the policy, the next step really is to, let's say, maybe I can manually go in and do this here. Okay. So in a perfect world, it would have dynamically allowed me to pull that from the API. And then once you've decided on the applications that you want there, you do app ID reconciliation selected, and that will actually go through and pull the applications from this green column into the column to the left, the actual security policy applications. So from there, we need to go ahead and push that down to the firewall. And we can do that directly via the API. So we go to the last tab here, this red tab, the output tab. And if you were working directly with, like a config from another platform or an existing Palo Alto config, just a straight XML file, you do the mappings and the outputs here. But since we have API connection directly to our firewall, we can actually push directly to it the changes that we made. And the thing about this methodology of doing the app ID is it shouldn't be disruptive to the end users. I'm not saying just go willy-nilly do it in the middle of the day, but since your existing security policy is already, your port-based security policy is there, and the traffic's hitting that already, you know that you're not going to be disrupting that traffic by adding an app ID enabled policy above that, right? And talk briefly about the difference between, can everybody see at the bottom here where it says atomic and subatomic? Let me move that up a little bit. Everybody see that? So an atomic commit. So what this is, an atomic API permit commit will actually go through and generate the whole policy for the firewall, not just the changes that you made, whereas a subatomic commit will actually go through and only commit what you specify, so you get checkboxes. One word of caution with subatomic commits, they sound better, right? But especially when working with security policy, there's a couple of items that you want to be sure to check, not just the policies themselves, but there's an option called order. Very important. The order of the security policy, where it falls in the policy stack. Otherwise, it'll just show up at the bottom, which is bad, right? You don't want that, right? That defeats the whole purpose of what you just went through, right? In a perfect world, smaller environment, an atomic commit is an atomic API and commit are preferable. A larger environment with multiple firewalls, panorama, you might want to do subatomic, but again, just don't forget the order option. So, and that will just go through dynamically. You generate the API request. So it reaches out to the firewall, says, I'm going to make some changes. This is what happens when your lab environment is over the internet and you're connected via VPN, I guess. Having a good old time with that. I guess I should have staged the VM local to the firewall and just connected to that. Oh well. Yeah, what fun of, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's no variables there except for just basic connectivity back to the lab. So, but yeah. So essentially, this goes through, initializes, it lists out the changes, and then step 2 actually sends the API or the changes via the API. Now, one thing to note, it sends the changes, does not commit, right? So then you still have to go back in, log into the firewall, and commit the changes. So you get that kind of stopgap option where you can say, oh, did this actually turn out the way that I liked it? Nope, revert, start over. Yes, looks good, commit, right? And it's worth noting in the materials, the torrent and on the USB stick, I put the migration tool user guide in there, and this process is really well detailed out, along with some troubleshooting steps and things like that within that user guide. So, yeah. Failed miserably at the demo. Apologize about that, but so that's the migration tool in a nutshell. There. Anything you want to add? Yeah.
They are teaching a wireless hacking class over there, so that might have something to do with it. So yeah, but the mic. Yeah, oh, you're wired.
Yes.
A couple things. So the mic. It's really the firewall policy maintenance and update tool. You know, it's migration tool is kind of a bad name for it now, but let's still call it migration tool. So yeah, with 3.1, we're really concentrating on pulling in your policy, checking your policy against your own logs and telling you what we see, and then giving you the opportunity to update that policy to have it be more secure. You know, just because you have a security policy, or even just because you have a firewall that can detect applications, doesn't make you any more secure unless you're being much more specific about your security policy. Instead of allowing anything into my data center on port 80, maybe you're being more specific about a specific application, and that reduces the attack surface. That makes you more secure. And so with 3.1, the whole idea was, hey, let's help you make your policies more specific, more secure, and to leverage that layer 7 control, not just the visibility, but the control. Now, where we're going with 3.2, I'll give you a little preview of the version that's coming out here in the next couple of months. We are going to be doing for applications, or for users and groups, what we've done for applications. And so now, instead of suggesting, hey, this rule, this port 80 rule ought to be these 3 applications, we're also going to suggest, and these 5 people access that rule, so maybe you ought to change the rule from anyone or any IP to these 5 people getting access to that, because that's what we've seen historically in your environment. So we're taking it one step further, not just applications, but now it's going to be user and group based, and making suggestions on, again, how to take those rules that are really wide open and help you squeeze that down to the least access that's required from a user standpoint too.
That's really cool. I'm excited to see that. You know, and I props to Palo Alto, right? I think they saw people getting onto the platform in a you know, kind of still with that port block service mentality, right? That, you know, port 80 was, you know, web browsing, right? And you know, they saw that the landscape had changed, that, you know, port 80 is not that. But I mean, you know, people kind of stalled there, right? They weren't going beyond that and fully utilizing the investment that they made in the firewall. So they released this, you know, again, free to customers, available for everybody, so that you know, you could get on that path, you know, and get beyond just that port block policy and actually start using the firewall the way it was intended. Because I think you know, with the threat landscape the way it is, that's really the place where you want to be, right? Much more so. So, yes, sir.
So, when you're coming from a forklift change,
Mm-hmm.
and you're obviously taking the port-based rule over to Palo Alto, daunting task. You've got all your old legacy rules,
Mm-hmm.
and using the migration tool. The best is at first, maybe do it the same, like do a one-to-one. You obviously want to get rid of a bunch of your rules. Maybe do an app-based rule, one-to-one, where possible first, and then clean up the old rules, and then tidy up the new app rules once you delete the old rules. Is that a good methodology?
So the question is about the methodology for adopting app ID rules, leveraging the migration tool, and is it best to do one for one, or to group policies together for applications? So my experience, depending on the environment, how many policies there are, it might make better sense to do one for one. But I think Chris wants to add something.
I was going to mention, in addition to what we discussed on there, I likely see in a lot of environments there where you're erring on the side of caution, and you're going to have the simultaneous existence of the old rule and your newer application-based rule for several times, and I see potentially several iterations of the use of this tool, just to make sure that you're all-inclusive in the applications that you're grabbing when you're doing the analysis on that. So it's really a balance of your needs on there, but you know, on a cautious approach on that, you know, if you're just going back 7 days, if you're just going back 30 days, you might not catch everything the users are actually using on the application on that, and it may make multiple iterations there for you to truly make that last leap of turning off the other previous policy. And in the meantime, you're looking at the hits on that other rule to make sure that you're not getting any hits on the rule that doesn't have applications tied to it, to make sure that nothing is falling through the net, so to speak.
Good questions. Appreciate that. Would I start in the data center first and work my way out to the edge? I think data center, you're dealing with a lot more knowns there. You know the applications, you know your data, or at least you can go talk to somebody about the applications or the application owner. So I'd say the data center is a little bit of a quicker win for me personally. But it depends on the environment. I'm not going to stand up here and dictate what you should do. But for me, that I think is a good place to start. Do you guys want to add anything to that? End users are scary. So Sobit says, start with them, and I don't disagree with that for sure. I wonder as far as I don't know. Yeah, that could be easier. Yeah, I guess now that I think about it. Yeah, it's a loaded question, Jared. How dare you?
You may not have as clear of an objective around what the allowed policies are for your end users, and that may be something that you have to look at and review as part of this policy there. It may be easier to define inbound applications and what they should be than it is outbound and what you want them to be. And I think that part of this policy may become reviewing the policies of what the acceptable apps are for your users if you are using this to lock outbound application policies.
Very good. So any other questions for the group here? Yes, sir. Is 7 ready for prime time? I did promise to show you guys some 7.0 stuff, so I will do that. Negative. It is not TAC approved yet. So the current release of 7 is 7.03. It has been out for 2 weeks, 1 week, 2 weeks. So a couple of criteria to be a TAC approved version of PanOS. It has to be out at least 6 weeks. So we're waiting on that. And there can't be any major bugs on any single platform. And significant, thank you. Yeah, I always remember that. And it has to be a significant percentage of the install base using it. And then TAC will give it a stamp of approval that it's ready for prime time.
It doesn't have to be like.
Yeah, non-trivial, yeah, so. Okay, so not yet. We're hoping for 7.03. 7.02, 7.01 and 7.02 had significant enough bugs that they never made it to TAC recommended release. That being said, I do have customers that are using them because they had the, and it depends, right? If there's a killer functionality that you absolutely need in 7.0, and there isn't a known bug with what you're using, then maybe move with caution into that. Risk reward, yep, exactly. Yeah, risk analysis, cost benefit analysis, right? So one of the places that I've seen 7.0 used a lot is in Panorama. Panorama seems pretty stable, and I've put that in production because we needed. There's a function within Panorama 7 to import existing firewall policies and existing firewall config into Panorama, so that you can administrate it directly from there. And that was a specific use case with the customer that I was working with. So we cautiously went in, and they haven't had any issues. So hold on. Absolutely.
So the other use case you may have for running Panorama on 7 when you're running production on 6 on the firewalls, maybe for the ACE or the correlation events that you have on the device there. You'll see that underneath the monitor here. Yeah, it's a new 7.x feature there where you can correlate events. Basically, you're looking at the idea that you have, and it's introduced in 7.x code, is if you see, say, wildfire trigger, or you have something along those lines, do you see hosts that are doing some sort of activity that may indicate that they're doing something that correlates to that wildfire, that they may have actually run that executable? It looks at that. It looks at other indicators, such as if they're going to dynamic URL sites or different things there to correlate that. And in fact, that's exactly what Jason's showing there, the different things that we're looking for, correlating objects there and the correlated events. But this automated correlation engine there is a 7.x specific feature, and it requires at least the 3000 platform, or it requires running on Panorama. So there may be a use case where you could have Panorama on 7.x code to take advantage of this particular functionality, even if your firewalls aren't there yet.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, the correlated objects, are they pre-built or are they configurable? These are all developed by Palo Alto, specifically Unit 42, the threat intelligence group, the threat investigation group. So these are kind of your indicators across multiple traffic types, what may be an indicator of an attack. And I kind of would say that it's similar to the botnet report that we had in the past, but it's like botnet on steroids, right? It's actually even more so, right? And so it's worth noting this demo that I was working is a VM series, so no ACE, no advanced correlation engine, but we do have it in our lab. So you cannot modify these. You can disable them. You can re-enable them, but you cannot modify them. They are currently only provided by Palo Alto, and perhaps in the future you'll be able to create your own. But right now it's strictly just a Palo Alto provided content.
Yeah, and a couple things real quick. We have added one recently. The obfuscated, the second to last one was recently added, so we can add those as part of the weekly content updates. And then in the future, there are plans to allow you to create your own combinations of indicators and have your own objects made there. Jason, can you grab the chevron at the top of the green bar? I think there's one more field you can add that's not there by default, but for you, yeah, go ahead and add them both. Now if you click on the name, now you can see the actual raw data for you bit heads. If you wanted to see exactly what this particular object, what is it exactly looking for, and in combination of what else in order to fire. So this gets you the really deep detail on what we're doing in that correlation engine.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. All the correlation objects are enabled by default when you upgrade to 7.0, provided your platform supports it, like Chris said. So in your case, yes. So far so good on 7.03. So you can see what an event looks like. So beacon detection. And it gives actual breakdown, oh, this person was using IRC. But, correlated across multiple events, that's a pretty strong indicator something might be going on. At least warrants some investigation, right? And just as any other events, you can alert or, generate email or whatever off any of these sort of things, just like you would on any other type of log. The other big thing with 7.0 is the complete redesign of the ACC. So the ACC that's on 6 has been with the platform since the beginning, right? So Palo Alto went through, and actually I'm going to go back over here because this has a lot more interesting data on it. So complete redesign of the ACC. So by login user, you can go in and modify. Each one of these is a modifiable widget. You can create new tabs with additional groups and multiple actual widget types, right? So again, what I mentioned earlier about Panachrome, going way back to the beginning, if anybody remembers, Panachrome is this this interesting Chrome plugin that kind of gives you a breakdown on traffic on the firewall and things like that. And that was one thing that people are always asking. I don't know what's how much traffic's going through the firewall, so Panachrome kind of filled that gap a little bit. And the data's there. It's just it wasn't presented in an easy GUI type format, right? Yeah, you can pull it with SNMP. You can. MRTG is your friend, right? That kind of thing. But with the new ACC, we can see that we have specific traffic graphs right here. And I'm just looking at the last hour, right? But we can see actual throughput of the firewall traffic graphs. And it gives a lot more historic context, whereas Panichrome is only while you've got your browser open connected to the firewall, right? So very, very limited use case. I use it sometimes when I'm at an environment when we're doing a cut, right? And I'm wanting to look specifically at some things, session counts and things like that, and I'm not in the...
Open that up for 6 hours.
6 hours, yes, sir.
6 hours and go after the graph.
Yep, we can do that.
The other thing worth mentioning on here too is that you can define. So the other thing worth mentioning when we're talking about the ACC layout and something that may not necessarily be intuitive is the fact that each of these widgets there, you can define local filters on each individual widget you have within the screens there. But if you find that it's a useful filter that you want on all the screens, you can actually click a button to pop that to the global filters on the left. So there's the concept of a global filter that applies to every single widget you've got on the page, or the concept of local filters within the widget itself.
Yeah, so just an example of how I'd investigate the traffic, similar to with the old ACC, is, you know, is that Marcia or Martha? I can't read. Marcia. So Marcia here has been transmitting a lot of data with only 1.7 or 1,700 sessions. That's a lot. That's a lot. So let's look into her. And using the example that Chris was just mentioning, we can then promote this to a global filter, right? So we're looking at it specific in this graph. And this graph can kind of break out. You can get a little bit more data. Maybe. There we go. So it just changes the view a little bit, gives you a little bit more of a detailed view. Of course, you can still jump over to the logs too, right there, so that you can see the corresponding events within any of the logs, just like you would in the old ACC. But then we can promote it to a global filter. Now we're looking specifically on the traffic that was identified as Marcia. We can see, you know, web browsing, SSL, IRC.
One of the other cool things is, as you see a spike in any of those graphs, you can actually drag and drop a graph and select a specific time frame, and then promote that as well to see, okay, I saw a spike. What was the application during that spike? Well, we highlight the spike, promote that to a global filter. That could just be for this. That could be just be for this source. You could do it up, you know, maybe under Marsh's name, or like I say. But you can drag and drop the timing and investigate a little bit more. I think this is running 7.0 still. I don't know if it's 03. So.
Yeah, no, it isn't. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is 701 maybe. Oh, he asked me to move to the threat tab. So, yeah. So Marcia, because we still have the global filter of Marcia, right? So now we've moved tabs, and it's still specific to traffic that was identified as that user, right? Unexpected SSL and web, right? Hitting that policy that we talked about earlier. Unexpected ports for SSL traffic and web traffic. And just general unexpected traffic with the applications. See if we're blocking anything that Marcia's doing. Probably not. Yeah, it's alert only. So yeah, we're not going to have any blocked traffic. But it's worth noting in here that you can, like I said, go back in and create your own, maybe security operations center style, you know, graph on there. So that you can kind of dig into it, and then you know, you've got your own customized stuff per user, so you can, every time you log in, go to the ACC and you get that one view that you really want to be looking for. Yep, absolutely. Jane, Cindy. It's not always Marcia, is it? Yes. So I'm just digging around a little bit. Look, you know, saw a spike there in the user count. You know, maybe we want to see what Ricky's been up to this time. Ricky's a funny guy. We know he's always up to no good. So. Yeah, so he's hitting some suspicious DNS queries. You know, oh, lots of DNS on non-standard ports. That's really interesting, huh? So you can see how you can really move around a little bit more dynamically with the new ACC versus the old ACC. It was a little bit more static, you know. And again, just as easy to jump into the logs and check this out, right? I think really we know Ricky's up to something here, or at least his system is, and we want to go and do some incident response on him. But you know, you can also export directly, so we can pull out PDFs directly of either individual widgets or the whole dashboard. So you now have a PDF to pull into you know, your other reporting. You want to go prove to Ricky, hey Ricky, you're up to something, you know, or show Ricky's boss. I don't know if Ricky's boss really cares about DNS on a non-standard port. He just wants to know why Ricky's, you know, on Facebook all day, right? So, anywho. Anything else? Any other questions? No? Good. I hope you guys found value in. Oh, yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I found it very useful tool on
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Okay. Seen that. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Okay. So in the Sans reading room, right? Yeah, okay. Then I have seen that, and that's, yeah, fantastic. Thank you for bringing that up. So in the Sans reading room, there's a hardening guide and security best practice guide for Palo Alto with an audit tool at the end. That's extremely good read. I'll just have to see if I can find that really quick and update the slides. I don't know if that'd really be valuable at this point, but I have my contact info, email address, Twitter thing. Not a lot on the Twitter, but right there. So these were a couple of links here. Palo Alto's really done a great job of documenting with specific use cases since PanOS 6. So definitely check out the documentation page. Here's the migration tool area with the forums and where to download it. Link to the SANS article on dynamic block lists, and then also the dynamic block lists that are maintained by unofficially by Palo Alto employee. So great. Well, thank you all very much. Like I said, I hope you got value out of this, and you know, go firewall. So. Yes, sir. You got it.